Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Horseman, Data Evangelist with DATAVERSITY. We would like to thank you for joining the current installment of the monthly DATAVERSITY webinar series, Real World Data Governance with Bob Seiner. Bob's topic du jour is AI and data governance rules that match your organization's need. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. If you would like to chat with us or chat with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the Zoom chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely switch that to network with everyone. For questions, we'll be collecting them by the Q&A section. To find the chat and the Q&A panels, you'll see the icons for those features in the bottom middle of your screen. As always, we will send a follow-up email within a couple of business days containing links to the slides, a recording of this session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for the series, Bob Seiner. Bob is the president and principal of KIK Consulting and Education Services and the publisher emeritus of the Data Administration newsletter, tdan.com. Bob was recently awarded the DAMA Professional Award for significant and demonstrable contributions to the data management industry. Bob specializes in non-invasive data governance, data stewardship, and metadata management solutions. And with that, I will hand the floor over to my good friend Bob Seiner to start his presentation. Hello and welcome.
Hey, Mark, can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
I needed to unshare and then turn off my mute because I figured it would be more beneficial if people could actually hear me during the webinar today.
Yeah,
So
that generally works out.
thank you for the fantastic introduction. Like always, I always love doing webinars with you and with Shannon as well, but love working on these with you. This is a really important topic, as I always say, that is very relevant today. Talking as organizations are talking about AI and they're talking about data governance, and people recognize that the roles are very important and play a the roles play a very big role as the backbone of an AI or data governance program. I wanted to make certain that we had a webinar this year that specifically talked about the roles of both of these and how they might work together. But before I get started, I just wanted to kind of highlight that this is episode 157 in the series of real world data governance webinars with between myself and DATAVERSITY. Hey, Mark, do you recognize that guy on the screen right there?
I wanted to say Punxsutawney Phil because I just watched Groundhog Day a couple of days ago.
And so this is not the Punxsutawney Phil, for those of you who don't know, is the prognosticator of weather in my local area, and I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he comes out and he either sees his shadow or doesn't see his shadow, and he predicts the weather for the next 6 weeks. Well, this is not actually Punxsutawney Phil. This is his lesser known brother, Punxsutawney Pete, and he is a prognosticator of data and technologies in the future. So, and when Punxsutawney Pete came out, he saw his shadow and he said, "It says there's going to be 6 more years of AI and data governance in our future." So, so that's the whole idea. I always like to put something that's month related on this screen. So, let's get into the topic for today. But everybody should recognize Punxsutawney Pete as the twin brother, lesser known brother of the twins, should I say. A little bit about me, as I usually say before we get started, and I want to really jump into the topic quickly. There's a lot of ways that I partner with DATAVERSITY to do this webinar series. We've been doing it since 2012. It's always on the third Thursday of the month. Next month on the third Thursday of the month, I'm going to be talking about integrating AI into your governance framework. And in DC at the Data Governance and Information Quality Conference, the DATAVERSITY event that took place there, I talked about doing this. I talked about how do we take a data governance framework and actually integrate AI into it. So I've kind of summarized that down into a presentation that I will be giving, or will be the webinar that comes up in March. I will also be speaking at the DGIQ West Conference in the EDW Enterprise Data World Conference in May. I'll be doing a tutorial on data governance tools, templates, and techniques, and that will take place on May 5th. If you're not familiar with the books Non-Invasive Data Governance, I've written a couple of them. One called Non-Invasive Data Governance, the other one called Non-Invasive Data Governance Strikes Again. And the third book in the series Non-Invasive Data Governance Unleashed is going to be published in the middle of March. So stay tuned for that. If you're connected to me on LinkedIn, I'll be announcing that when that gets published. I also have learning plans that are available through DATAVERSITY on non-invasive data governance, non-invasive metadata governance, glossaries, dictionaries, and catalogs. KIK Consulting is the name of my consulting business. And as I always joke about, in my spare time, I'm also faculty at Carnegie Mellon University here in my hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in their exec ed program, CDAIO program. So here, a big drum roll, please. Mark, you don't have a sound effect for a drum roll, do you? But this just came to me today. This is what the cover of the new book is going to look like. So please look for it at your best, at your most popular bookseller. So Non-Invasive Data Governance Unleashed, and it focuses on empowering people to govern data and AI. All right, enough about me. I would much rather talk about the subject at hand, and that is, how do we determine the most appropriate AI and data governance roles that will match our organization's need? So the subjects that I've kind of broken them into is, first, to talk about matching the roles with the organization's need. That's kind of the overall overarching subject for today's webinar. And then I want to get into some more specifics about defining the responsibilities of the people in your organization that are data stewards versus the people that really know AI and are the AI specialists. Then I'll talk about balancing innovation in AI, because we don't want to feel restricted, and our organizations don't want to feel restricted in what we do with AI. So we want to have innovation, but we also need to balance that with governance oversight. So I'll talk about that for a few minutes. I will share the non-invasive data governance framework that I've talked about in the conferences and at EDGO a couple of weeks ago, talk about integrating AI into that framework. And then, as I've been doing recently, kind of wrap up with some examples of some success stories of organizations that have aligned AI and governance roles. So if that's good for us to get started, I will first just real quickly jump into some definitions that I use. And if you've been attending this webinar series, you've heard these definitions ad nauseum, because I repeat them in every webinar, but I've summarized them down. That data governance is the execution and enforcement of authority. So no matter what definition you use for data governance, and no matter what approach you take, whether it's non-invasive or kind of the traditional, if you build it, they will come approach, or the command and control approach that a lot of organizations take, at the end of the day, you're going to need to execute and enforce authority. The government, the regulators aren't coming to you and saying, follow these rules if you'd like. You're going to be forced at some point to be able to demonstrate that you're executing and enforcing authority over your data. So that is my definition of data governance. When I talk about stewards, I always talk about the potential that everybody in the organization is a data steward. If a person has a formal relationship to the data and they're being held accountable for that relationship to the data, they can't opt in or opt out. They're basically data stewards, because a data steward is somebody who is held formally accountable for what they do with data. And I typically limit that to like the definition, the production, and usage of data. So those actions that people take, if they're being held formally accountable, they're a data steward. The definitions that I added specifically to this webinar are the ones around AI governance roles and data governance roles. And what I found interesting is that, I just want to try to make some of these roles that I'm going to talk about today, because you're going to see some of them are quite unique, and you might not typically have names for the roles, but really the AI governance roles are the navigators of innovation, and making certain that AI is doing what it needs to, but that it doesn't like crash. It doesn't turn into an iceberg of chaos, so to speak. And then the data governance roles are the ones that are the people in the organization that are architecting trust around the data, building that foundation of accountability, accuracy, accessibility, that keeps everything running smoothly, that keeps the data house in order, that prevents us from any levels of risk, or at least severely limits the levels of risk that will come from the AI solutions that we are developing. So real quickly, those are the definitions. The first topic I want to jump into is how do we match our AI governance roles with what the organization needs? And I suggest a couple of different steps. And one is to define ownership for the AI data. I'll talk about that for a minute. Creating an AI governance task force. If you don't have something like that within your organization, then maybe you should be asking, who is the group that has responsibility for moving AI forward in our organization? I'm going to talk about providing the level of explainability to the people who are championing the AI efforts across the organization, embedding accountability across the teams. And then AI is something that's evolving in organizations, so we're going to need to learn to adapt these roles as AI matures. So let's just spend a moment talking about defining clear ownership of data. And really the key word that I would say comes from this slide is the word accountability. I use that in my definition of what a data steward is: somebody who's held formally accountable for their relationship to the data. Formally accountable is really the key words there. So as we're defining clear ownership for AI data, we need to recognize somebody like an AI data steward who has the responsibility to oversee the integrity, the ethical use of the AI training data, the data that's going to go into the models that we're using. Because in reality, if nobody owns it, that there's a good chance that everybody's going to misuse it. So if there are no clear set policies and direction to go, if there's no clear set accountability, it can be very easily our AI data environment can become a quagmire, can become can be a swamp that is not going to return on investment for the organization. So basically, accountability is the key. Somebody should have ultimate accountability for AI. Somebody should have accountability for the quality of the data that's accessed through AI. And in case I haven't mentioned accountability enough on this slide, somebody has to have the accountability to, for making certain that the right people can access and that they're ingesting the data that's being produced by AI appropriately. And so I use the term ownership on this slide, but I prefer to use the term steward as somebody who's taking care of the data, taking care of AI for the organization. They don't necessarily own AI or own the data. I talked about creating an AI governance task force. And if you don't have one within your organization, and again, I don't want to read through all the bullet points on the screen, but it's important to have a team that crosses different functions of your organization. I call it a cross-functional dream team of these people of IT, of business, of data experts, and use their joint knowledge to make certain that your AI is aligning not only with the corporate values, but checking all those boxes that regulations and regulatory bodies are telling us that we need to check. So it's not a revolution. We need to get people to join together. I've suggested to multiple clients of mine that since they have typically a data governance steering committee or some group that is steering their data governance initiative, now they have an AI steering committee. I'm suggesting that we kind of bring those together and that it's a data and AI executive steering group in an organization. Just as an example, the Carnegie Mellon program that I'm involved with changed the name of their program from Chief Data Officer to Chief Data and AI Officer. Just to give you an idea as to what they're thinking about how important it is to have a governance task force that has impact within your organization. So this AI stuff is kind of brand new to a lot of people in your organizations. They're hearing about AI every day, but it's almost like it's this shiny box that's got stuff in it that people aren't really certain as to how it's going to impact them, how it's going to impact them professionally, how it's going to impact their organization. So we need, as data governance practitioners, AI practitioners, we need to prioritize how we explain things and prioritize the explainability through the AI champions. So empowering perhaps an AI transparency officer, somebody who's going to ensure that the algorithms are understandable more to than just the people who are focusing on AI. They're going to need to be explainable to the mere mortals within your organization and not just your data scientists within your organization. So again, some silly names, but maybe they're not as silly as they may seem on the surface. An AI sanity checker, somebody who is making certain that the algorithms are in tune with what the organization is thinking, preventing the organization from making decisions that they regret at some point. Designing a data accountability czar, or a chief data governance officer, or a chief governance officer, somebody who is making certain that accountability, which is very informal in organizations, moves from being informal to being more formal. So it ensures that AI isn't making up its own facts, but making certain that it's doing what it's supposed to do. And again, having a sanity checker, having an accountability czar, having a bias bouncer. How's that for a new role? Just to keep bias out of the decisions that are being made and the data that we have within our AI models and such, or a governance whisperer, somebody that is kind of speaking the language of the business and kind of bringing the AI jargon into line with what leadership is thinking about. And then another way to match the roles with the organizational need is to embed, this some type of ethics committee that is involved in some of the decisions that are being made, to review use cases, make certain that AI doesn't become a nightmare within your organization. And there's, again, I just list a bias referee, designate somebody as the conscience of the organization who needs to ask the question of not only can we, but should we do some of the things that we're doing with AI. Launching an AI readiness team, creating a transparency guru. Again, this is just the first section of this webinar, and I just wanted to share with you some of the actions that your organization can take to match the AI governance roles with your organization's needs. So hopefully some of these roles might not seem as silly on the surface as you start thinking of who's doing this stuff within our organization, and do we need to, in order to be effective with AI, do we need to have people that are kind of playing these roles? And the last comment here on the matching AI roles with your governance need is be familiar or be aware that the AI roles may change over time as AI becomes more of a thing, it becomes more of a practice within your organization. It's like a living, breathing entity, and you got to revisit how you are defining your governance roles around AI, just like you need to revisit from time to time your data governance roles and your operating model. Again, the backbone of a successful governance program. All right, so now we talked about some of the roles and then some of the funky names that I gave to the roles that might make sense for you to consider as you are bringing AI and data roles closer together within your organization. The next thing I want to do is I want to talk about some of the responsibilities of the people in your organization who are data stewards and AI specialists. Just want to let you know that if you, again, are connected to me on LinkedIn, I'm going to be posting an article soon that talks specifically about the role of the data steward in AI. And again, it's just to share my thoughts as to where stewards can be engaged. But that's really what we're going to talk about in this section of the webinar today, too, is, let's define the responsibilities of the stewards as it compares to those people who are the quote unquote AI specialists within your organization. So we'll talk about clarifying accountability for data, aligning these specialists with the business goals. Always the most important thing is to make certain, what are we doing this for? We need to be doing things for our organization that align with what the business strategy is, what the business goals are. I'll talk about bridging the gap between the stewards and the specialists, formalizing these roles, and that's again, the definition of stewardship is formalized accountability. So how do we formalize these roles to help us to avoid the data chaos that is lurking if we don't formalize some level of accountability? And then I'll talk about integrating ethics into everyday roles. So the first thing is just kind of clarifying accountability for data quality. And I was going to say, make the data stewards the guardians of the galaxy. No, the guardians of accuracy. So these are the people that day to day are working with the data. They know the data inside out. They're defining, they're producing, they're using data as part of their job. And we need to leverage what they're doing or what we want them to be doing in order to make certain that every piece of data that's coming out of our AI solutions is as trustworthy as it can be, that it's traceable, that it's auditable, and that it's tantrum free. That's not going to cause problems where people are having fits over the decisions that are being made from AI. So again, clarifying accountability, making certain that we get our stewards engaged in the accountability for data quality. It's not just a data governance team problem. We need to engage people across the enterprise. So the couple taglines from that is no more data drama. Stewards are on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just by the mere fact that they have a relationship to the data that they're being held accountable for. They're the ones that can help us to assure that the data is being used ethically, that we can improve the quality and the value and the understandability of the data that's being included in our information systems, but that are also being included in our AI models. So, you've heard the expression garbage in, garbage out. Well, not on their watch. I mean, if we can get the stewards to act and recognize themselves as stewards, and they take pride in making certain that there is no garbage in, garbage out, that's a great way to be able to engage stewards. And they're, like I said, they're on duty all the time. We just need to know how to leverage them. Again, another reason for that article that I just mentioned that I will be publishing soon. And traceability matters. At some point, the auditors and the government is going to require that your data and that your decisions are traceable. And some of that is going to be through metadata. So who are the people that are defining, producing, and using metadata? Well, those are the data stewards as well. I think I'm going to need to move a little bit quicker, maybe on some of these slides, but lots to say on this subject, and interested in the questions that you have in case you have questions as well. So the next thing that we need to do to define the responsibilities of the stewards and the AI specialists is make certain that we're aligning the AI specialists with the business goals. I mean, I think that's really in the program at CMU and everything that I hear, the top item is that what are we doing this for? If it's not aligned with business goals and business value, we're making a mistake. We're going to have a harder time selling it than if it is closely aligned with business goals. So as it says here, AI for ROI, if it's not driving value, why are we even coding it up? And that same exact question has been asked for data governance. If data governance isn't driving value within the organization, then why are we even governing our data? So we need to be articulating to the people that need to know in terms that they can understand how not only there's AI for ROI, but governance for ROI, because the AI, as I said in a webinar, I think last month maybe, AI doesn't care where it gets its data from, whether it's structured data or unstructured data. The governing of our data needs to be driving towards value for the business, or we're going to have an uphill battle trying to convince people that we're doing the right thing. The algorithms, meeting accountability. Again, don't want to read through all the bullets, but AI is not magic. It's not going to clean up the data itself. And as I've always said, the data will not govern itself. The metadata will not govern itself. We need to engage the data stewards. We need to engage them alongside the AI specialists within the organization. We need to bridge the gap between the stewards and the specialists as, again, another way of defining the responsibilities of these roles. the picture, by the way, the picture on the screen is of the city of Pittsburgh, kind of a direct point, a direct angle on the point in downtown Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh is known as the city of bridges. There's 446 bridges in Pittsburgh. So it looks like we're an island in the middle. We're not really an island in the middle of these rivers, but that's the point I wanted to make with bridging the gap between stewards and specialists. I mean, we need to make certain that these folks aren't working in silos, that they're working together, that the stewards, that governance in general is part of the AI conversation. So we need to foster a level of collaboration between the stewards and the specialists, just to make certain that all of this data, whether it comes from structured sources, unstructured sources, that they work nicely together and that it's being governed. So basically, AI needs a babysitter, somebody who's looking over it all the time. We need to move from a position of chaos with our data in a lot of our organizations to a level of more collaboration. AI and governance should not be separate. They should be together, not just in terms of AI governance, like the ethical use of data and those types of things, but the governance of the data that goes into the AI is, you're not going to have AI or AI governance without some level of data governance and information governance within your organization. So the idea is to kind of bridge the gap. Again, bridge the gap between the stewards and the specialists. I don't know if you notice in that picture also, in the middle of the picture, there's a fountain in downtown Pittsburgh, right where the rivers converge. And that's something that Pittsburgh is very well known for. So let's talk about another step to define the responsibilities of the stewards and the AI specialists. We need to formalize the roles. Again, can't emphasize moving from informal to formal is really one of the core tenets behind the whole concept of non-invasive data governance. So give the AI stewards, give the AI specialists clear formal responsibilities. So, nobody is left saying, I thought you were going to do this. I thought that was my responsibility. So we can clear that up. In America and probably in a lot of the world, there's an American comedy skit called "Who's on First?" And the comedians were Abbott and Costello. It's a baseball skit. If you're not familiar with it, go take a look at it. But it's like, who's on first? Well, the guy who is playing first base, his last name is Who, and the guy on second base playing second base his name is What. And so when they say who's on first, what's the name of the second baseman? It's a very funny comedy skit. But there's some real important points to be taken from that. If we don't know who's on first or what's playing second base, and in terms of our AI and governance solutions, it's going to cause chaos within the organization. So we need to present clear roles around governance so it doesn't become a guessing game as to who's doing what. There's some method behind the madness of what we are doing. So we're not blaming each other. We don't have to have a ton of roles, but we need to make certain that we do have formal roles within our organization. Another way to define the responsibilities is to integrate the ethics into the everyday roles. And that is, again, one of the core tenets of the whole concept of being non-invasive in your approach to governance is, instead of interrupting or disrupting existing processes, unless, of course, they need to be disrupted, we want to integrate ethics into the everyday roles. We want to mandate that that ethics is considered in every model that are being built. While the stewards are there to help to be, again, the architect of quality, the foundation, the architects of the quality and foundations of the data that feed AI. But we need to integrate ethics into everyday roles within our organization. So bias is bad. As I've said, the stewards are kind of the AI watchdogs, but instead of being the watchdogs, it's really better if they can just work together as partners. All right, so now we've talked about the roles, now we've talked about the responsibilities. Let's talk about kind of balancing the whole need for being innovative with AI, with the whole concept of the oversight of the execution and enforcement of authority over the data in terms of AI and in terms of the information management systems and business intelligence systems within your organization. And some of the ways to balance AI with governance oversight is to first to establish a governance sandbox, and I'll talk about that here in a second. Talk about enforcing guardrails, but not necessarily putting handcuffs on people to make them feel like they need to report up through data governance as to all the things that they're doing. I'll talk about tying together innovation and accountability, recognizing the right advocates, the advocates for innovation within the organization, and then tracking the progress without slowing the organization down. I mean, everybody thinks data governance is going to stand in its way. And we as the practitioners of data governance need to change the narrative. We need to change the narrative as to that data governance is truly more of a mindset for the organization than the way it's being considered in many organizations. So we'll start out by talking about establishing this governance sandbox. And so we need to create a place where people can experiment with AI. And they just refer to that as the sandbox. So creating that playground for AI innovation where experimentation is something that is prevalent in that environment, but it needs to be under the watchful eyes of some level of governance. So again, test, tinker, and govern. It's an innovation, it's not anarchy. Fail smart, not hard. A gentleman that I know, Randy Bean, wrote a book called Fail Fast, Learn Faster. I think we need to take that as good advice too in the things that we're doing around establishing governance sandboxes within an organization. Enforce the guardrails. Again, balance the oversight with the creativity. Let's not put handcuffs on people. Let's help them rather than standing in their way of success. Certainly AI needs the boundaries, but they don't want chains to be wrapped around them. So again, these are, some thoughts about how we can take our data governance roles and match them with what we need within the organization. People don't want handcuffs on them. They want to spark innovation, but there also needs to be a level of guidance around that as well. And tie innovation to accountability. I mean, when it comes down to it, the things that I talked about at the beginning of the webinar were accountability, accountability, accountability. And not only that, but really formal accountability. Because in most of your organizations, you'll probably see that there are levels of informal governance taking place, that there are already people that are responsible, that are accountable for the data. They're just not being held formally accountable. So we need to tie that innovation, we got to tie that to the accountability that we're talking about within our governance programs. So requiring the AI teams to document things that are going to be really important for the use of AI moving forward, that's really critical to balancing innovation with governance oversight. Recognize that there are people within the organization, or designate roles that champion both AI and governance success within the organization. You don't really want to create these boundaries, or you don't want to really create too many boundaries that kind of thwarts any level of innovation and creativity. But creativity without boundaries can turn into chaos. And so we need to think big, we need to govern smart, we need to focus on the regulations and bring regulation to meet imagination, and figure out what happens when we can not only do the things that we need to do with the data and with AI, but we can also assure that we have confidence in the data to be able to again, leverage the most out of our initiatives, AI initiatives. And we don't want to interfere, again, trying to stay non-invasive. We want to track progress without slowing it. We want to keep governance oversight agile to whatever degree that we can, because again, the environment is changing. People are trying new things. We want to make certain that we're not thwarting their level of innovation. We just want to govern around it, and we want to prevent our organization from any of the risks that might come from making decisions based on data that is ungoverned. And again, such as some talking points to that is that governance, you want to develop governance that moves at the speed that your AI moves at. And let oversight be that guide, but not grind your AI efforts to a standstill. Stay lean, stay smart. Think of data governance and AI. Think of it as GPS and not being just like a traffic cop that's going to stop you. Let people know that the data governance program is there to assist and to provide insights as to the proper ways, the auditable ways, the ways that execute and enforce authority over the data that will be used in our AI solutions. All right, the last subject that I want to talk to you about before I just run through quickly a couple of examples of organizations that have brought these AI and data governance roles together. If you have a data governance framework, that's great. If you don't, I'm going to share one with you here real quick. I'm not going to try to sell you on the use of my framework, but if you do have a framework, before you start applying AI to that framework, you want to map it to the different things that are important within the framework. Get people in the organization to speak a common language. Create what I'm referring to as an AI first extension of your framework, and then empower the appropriate people and keep your framework flexible. That's really important when I talk about the differences between frameworks and models and approaches. A framework needs to be adjustable. It needs to be flexible. It needs to be something that evolves as your AI programs evolve, as your data governance programs evolve. So let's talk about these things here real quickly. So I suggested that you map data governance to your framework before you start integrating pieces into the framework. So I mentioned that I gave a presentation on this in December in Washington, D.C. at the DGIQ East conference, the DATAVERSITY event, where I went through each and every one of these rows and each and every one of these columns, and I suggested questions that you might want to ask before you really merge your AI governance into your data governance framework. So this is the image on the screen is what I refer to and what I wrote about in my second non-invasive data governance book is the non-invasive data governance framework. There's going to be a lot of announcements around the framework coming up, so stay tuned for that as well. But before you go applying governance to whatever framework you use, and there's a lot of really good frameworks that are out there, they're just modeled differently from the one that I'm sharing with you. Before you go and you merge AI into that, make sure you map what you're doing with AI to the things that are being represented within your framework. So don't patchwork AI governance, make sure it fits and make sure, I guess what I say here is avoid the governance jigsaw, because it really is a puzzle that needs to be filled in. And all I'm really saying by this, by applying governance to your existing framework, is that AI needs a seat at the table. They need to be in the room where it's happening. They need to be there just to make certain that as part of your governance and as part of your AI, that these two things are married together, like I talked about earlier in the webinar. And if you can't read the framework, I just wanted to, again, just share it with you in a larger size so that you could take a look at it. It's basically a cross-reference between the different core components across the top of the framework and the different levels of the organization. So, and we're going to want to know about every one of these columns, every one of these bridges at each of these levels in order for us to be successful. And so just wanted to share that with you as well. It's really important to be speaking a common language across the organization. Just to, again, I think one of the problems, one of the reasons why organizations are saying that data governance as a practice is failing right now is that it's not being communicated appropriately to the people high enough up in the organization for them in terminology that they understand, so that they really understand why governance is needed and why the AI and governance roles are so important to AI governance success. So you want to speak a common language, avoid this slide, if it didn't have the word AI on it and just said data management, it's something that we as data practitioners have been talking about for years, speaking a common business language. Well, we want to start speaking a common language with the people that are knowledgeable about AI, and not just baffle them with BS about and use jargon that are things that they don't really understand. So we want to make sure that we're communicating fluently with them. Um, I say that the AI jargon doesn't govern itself either, just like the data doesn't govern itself and the metadata doesn't govern itself. We need to be aligned with those people that can help us to be successful, and we need to demonstrate to them that we can help them to be successful. In fact, they need us in order to be successful. I talked about creating an AI extension, if that's what makes sense. Take your framework and add something to it that focuses specifically on AI and AI governance, and make certain that it integrates into your framework without having another framework. Okay, we have a data framework, we have an AI framework. Why don't we mesh them together or merge them together? AI needs the guardrails; they don't need guesswork. We need to plug AI into governance. And AI basically without governance is a big risk. It's a Wild West show. So we need to keep it structured, and we need to hold people accountable. This is really important too, empowering the people who are the cross-functional guardians of the data. So maybe data governance or the data group or the data strategy office shouldn't run AI, and the AI group shouldn't run data. Maybe we need to get them to co-own some of these processes and work together, so that ensures that not only are the technical, but the business people are seriously bought into what we're doing with governance and what we're doing with data. I wrote an article on LinkedIn fairly recently that talks about how data governance is a team sport. Well, the fact is, it's not just data governance, it's AI governance and the use of AI. It needs to be governed. It really is a team sport. If we need to co-own the governance process, then so be it. We should definitely co-own the governance process. IT can't do it alone. AI without guardians is a risk. It can potentially be chaos for your organization. And as my good friend Gumby would say, if you're not familiar with Gumby, that's the guy who's on the screen. He and his good friend Pokey, I think Pokey was a donkey, maybe, or a horse. They were childhood cartoons as I was growing up. But Gumby would always say, keep it flexible. Fit AI to your evolving organization needs. Governance has to evolve as your organization, as the use of AI evolves within your organization. Again, remember, it hasn't been that long that people have even been talking to the level they're talking now about AI. It's really only been a couple of years since generative AI became something that became readily available and usable within organizations. So we need to keep it smart. We need to keep it flexible. We need to adapt, or we know that at some point we as an organization and the things we're doing will be left behind. All right, so we have a few more minutes before I'm going to turn it over to Mark to see if there's any questions. And it looks like there are some questions, so that's great. We'll leave some time for that. I want to talk about some success stories of organizations that have aligned their AI and their governance roles. Again, that's the point of this webinar: is how do we get the roles associated with AI governance, with data governance? How do we get them to match what the organization needs? How can we get them to align? Here are just some examples. There's one from a large retail organization, from a banking group, from a healthcare industry, from an e-commerce organization, an organization that focuses on e-commerce, to an organization that is, basically trying to create a smart city and overcome the triumph of traffic, which is always a big problem in most of the big cities if you live in a big city. So here, real quickly, I'll just walk through these. In this retail giant, they look to create a cross-functional AI task force. And they did it in ways that I talked about here a little bit, that they brought together the stewards and the privacy officers and the people who were engineering the AI solution. And their outcome was that they were able to successfully deploy a level of predictive analysis to one of their biggest problems, and I think I've talked about this in previous webinars, was to optimize their inventory management. And so they boosted operational efficiency by 25%. Again, I don't have the details as to exactly how that 25% was measured, but I think they're saying that they were doing it. So even if it isn't that great of a boost, it's still a boost, and it's moving in the right direction for the organization. So AI loves governance. It just won't admit it, but AI needs governance. So that's something really important to take away from this webinar. Bringing together your stewards and your scientists like they did, to kind of create that dream team, that cross-functional task force that helps to bring AI and data governance together. And privacy and predictions, these things can coexist within an organization, and that's one of the things that this organization was able to represent. Let's talk about it in terms of banking on ethical AI. And this large financial institution brought the people in the organization who were representing, that were maybe the data subject matter experts, or even and I'm going to hate that I say this, the data owners, because I don't like the term owner, but brought those people together with the people that knew their AI. And they wanted to do it to make certain that they were overseeing any bias or any fairness in the loan approval process, which is really big for major bank institutions. And they need to have a demonstrable, auditable traceability to the data when they make decisions that are going to be contested. So that's what this organization did, was they brought together the governance leads and the people who knew AI to basically oversee the bias and the fairness. And then I share with you the outcome. The idea of bias-free banking and AI ethics. I mean, this is really important to organizations. So building the trust in the algorithms, building the lasting customer loyalty and customer relationship is extremely important in any industry. And to them, they saw that, we need to make certain that we are being fair and equitable to the people that we are serving as our customers. And how did they do it? They did it through the use of AI. Here's an example of a healthcare organization that, as many healthcare organizations are focusing on now, they are looking to ensure patient data integrity. Using diagnostic AI tools. They wanted to bring, again, the developer people with the clinical stewards of the data, and not have it being these things being created in silos, bringing these things together, as I talked about earlier in the webinar, through collaboration between the stewards and the specialists that know AI. And they talk about increasing accuracy rates by a certain percentage. That's the goal of organizations. That's the goal of organizations that are using AI to innovate, to become leaders, to stay leaders, to beat their competition. AI is going to be a tool moving forward, and I'll be darned if data doesn't have to be a huge piece of that. So better data, better diagnosis. You can't do AI without the governance. That's basically malpractice if you do governance without, or do AI without governance. And so in the healthcare world, a doctor's order is AI needs to be governed. We need to have roles associated with that. In an e-commerce organization, and again, Mark, I'm going to turn this back over to you here in a minute, an example of ensuring data product consistency and transparency, garbage in, garbage recommendations out. The secret to happy shoppers is that they trust that you're using the data, you're protecting your data, that you're being ethical, and you're being unbiased in the use of AI as a practice within your organization. So AI without data governance becomes random guessing. And the last example that I want to share with you is, you hear examples of this all the time, where cities are looking to become smart cities. And one of the first things they tend to focus on is the traffic and the congestion within those cities. So organizations used AI tools to monitor the congestion, monitor the emissions associated with the congestion, and drive those numbers the direction that they wanted to drive them in. But they used AI to do it. And it wasn't just the technicians doing this by themselves. It was the technicians and should I say the AI specialists and the stewards that were working together to drive to this outcome. All right, so I think I shared a lot with you in a relatively short period of time. Just real quickly to kind of rebrief on the things that I talked about. We talked about those roles, and I gave you some interesting roles that you may not be familiar with or that you might not even venture to use within your organization. Most important thing is to see who are the people in the organization that are carrying out these responsibilities? And that was the second topic I talked about, the responsibilities of the stewards and the specialists. We talked about balancing the need for innovation with AI, with the oversight that needs to be provided by data governance. And then I talked about how do you take AI governance and kind of inject it into your existing framework if you have one, and then shared a couple success stories with you. And so with that, Mark, I wonder if we have any questions today.
Boy, howdy. Our Q&A is electric as always. And this highest upvoted question, I have opinions about the premise, but I'm interested to hear your take on it. So the questioner says, for many decades now, organizations have been building and using sophisticated statistical models to develop business insights, classify and understand customers, make predictions and decisions, etc. Those models have relied on internal and external data from a variety of sources.
Wow,
I
somebody wrote
never
a book
s-
is the
y-
question, right?
exactly. I never saw a DG fascination or even interest in this work. What makes AI different? Why the current DG obsession with AI?
Well, I don't know. I'd kind of argue with with the whole premise as well,
Me
because
too,
just
yeah.
because we were doing statistical analysis from this data, if the data was ungoverned, then there has been problems inherent with doing statistical analysis on ungoverned data or data that doesn't have the level of quality. So I'm guessing that the organizations that did do statistical or are doing statistical analysis, there is some level of governance. You know, I talk about governance already exists within your organization. I would venture to say that they were governing. They had to be doing something that rose their level of confidence in that data. That's a great question to ask, by the way.
It
Why do
is.
we need it now if we didn't need it before? Well, the fact is, maybe they just didn't realize that they needed it before, and maybe there would have been improvements if they had used governance before. AI is again just bringing this to the front again, and
That,
so
yeah.
I don't agree with the premise of, well, why now when we didn't do it before? Things always seemed to be okay before. I don't know, Mark. I'm interested in your thoughts.
Well, yeah, like I completely agree with your take on this, Bob. And it's funny because I have a specific example of this. In higher ed, we had statistical models that predicted if students were at risk of failing so that we could intervene in their education and say, hey, maybe a study group would be helpful. That was all governed. There was governance behind that. So these things have been governed in the past in the past at organizations, but those of us who were doing data governance back then, we didn't want to do big fanfare all the time. We were involved in something. We were just out there protecting and governing data. So I don't see it as a new obsession. I just think it's to the forefront now because of the popularity of AI tools, specifically generative AI.
And it
It's
is,
it's
and
just
you're
more
what
popular now.
you know, one of the whole premises of non-invasive data governance is you're already governing. I would say that they
Exactly.
were already governing to some extent. They're just not, they weren't doing it as formally or as auditably, if that's a word, as they are now, or as they find a need for it now. But again, great question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a fun topic to talk about, so I was excited to ask it. Next question. What is the overlap distinction between a data steward and an AI data steward when data owned by a data steward is being used for non-AI business operations, but also being used for AI models?
That's an interesting question, the way that it was posed. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
ever use the term AI data steward. I just use the term data steward, and I may use the term AI specialist, but that's not a role, not specifically a role, at least not typically within, you know, many organizations that I've had the pleasure of working with. Um, an AI data steward and a data steward for non-AI data. I think the bottom line is if you don't care if your business intelligence data is governed or not, and you just want to govern your AI data, you're going to have a hard time doing that because a lot of the data that feeds your business intelligence engines are also feeding your AI engines. So I don't differentiate. I don't think I differentiated in the webinar. I don't think I used the term of AI data steward. I just used the term data steward. So I think they're probably one and the same. And again, a very good question, and it's probably one
Mhm.
that a lot of people are thinking about. It's not a new role. There's probably already people in your organization that are quote unquote stewards without even recognizing themselves as such. They should be
Mhm.
governing the data not only for their BI and their system and their analytical and statistical analysis, but also for AI. Good quality data is good quality data no matter how it's being used.
Excellent. We have another super popular question, and there's like two questions that talk about this, so I think we'll just do it in one here. Data governance specific metrics seem to be difficult for many organizations to determine, metrics that provide true insight but also value add. Now, with the addition and importance of AI as a key component of data governance frameworks, including your sample framework, what recommended metrics and KPIs do you suggest or recommend for organizations to employ or adopt? Can you provide some tangible examples?
Wow, what long questions. These are
I
incredible.
know.
It's
Yeah.
really great.
That's a whole webinar, I think, that one.
It is. And you know, if you recall back to the framework that I shared, one of those core components of a governance program is that metric framework. So, yeah, I typically break metrics into kind of acceptability metrics and business value metrics. So the fact that if you can measure, and it's probably going to be quicker to measure the acceptability of governance into your environment than it is going to be to measure the business value that is being drawn from it. I mentioned earlier that we really need to align or get our executives to understand the value that comes from them. So they need to not necessarily be dictating, but at least sharing with us the things that need to be measured that are important to them. And then we as data practitioners need to take that and align what we can measure with the things that they want to measure. So like I said, yeah, you can measure acceptability of the governance into the culture of the organization, and you can measure in some ways ROI on the improvement to the data, and you can monetize your data, and you can do things to measure it that way. My first suggestion would be to those people in the organization that are telling you how they want to use AI, those senior leadership, have them tell you what they want to measure. And then as our job as facilitators of this whole conversation, we should be able to directly align what we're doing and how we can measure it with the things that they want to have measured. Was that a cop out of an answer?
No, I think that's good. And like the other similar question was like measuring isn't as easy as it sounds. Like, how do you go about measuring the value of data governance work? And and our friend Pam had answered like, well, that's the point. What can you measure?
Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
there's a lot of wisdom in that. And like I know that I've measured some silly things in the past. Like, hey, this is the number of metrics we've defined in the last quarter. But I mean, that's a real thing that you did, and you're providing literacy to folks. So there's value in that. So it
Yep,
depends what's available, right?
yep. Good question. Great
It's a
questions tonight.
great question. I think we have time for one more.
Let's do
Um,
it.
there was one that I got as a direct message in chat that I absolutely loved
You
that
know
I
what?
want your
Somebody
thoughts.
asked a question, and I'm looking at the chat. It says, "How do new AI companies like OpenAI, how do they perform data governance?" That's not how I originally read the question. I read the question as, "How can those types of tools enable data governance?" And
Hmm.
if it's okay, I'd like to just kind of address that
Yeah.
real quickly.
Oh, for sure.
Because as part of governance, we're defining policies, we're defining standards, we're defining guidelines. We don't have to create them from scratch. We don't have to do what we used to do, at least I used to do, which is go out to Google and look to see if I could find examples of policies or charters or frameworks or those types of things. Well, these generative AI tools can really benefit you and benefit, help you to do things quicker. They're not going to provide to you output that you can use verbatim. All these things need to be tweaked. They need to be customized. They need to be put into your voice or your organization's voice. So they're all things that are that we as data governance practitioners can benefit from. As to how well these AI companies govern their data, your guess is as good as mine. I really don't have an answer to that right now.
Yeah, who's to say?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the last question that I really wanted your thoughts on is I've run into issues with non-technical stewards. Anyone have any experience with structuring the data steward roster in your organization?
Well, it sounds like it's a was it technical data stewards?
Non-technical stewards.
Non-technical data stewards. Well,
Our favorite people, Bob.
you mean they only know the data? They don't know the technical aspect of it? I think those are your friends. Those are the people that
Yeah.
you want to work alongside and understand what they are thinking. And so you can be non-technical and you can be a data steward because you're the ones, the people in the business are the ones who already define, produce, and use the data. And if they can recognize themselves as stewards, it's a big win for the organization.
Yeah, those were my favorite people too, Bob. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that too. That's
Okay.
all we have time for today. Sorry we didn't get to all the excellent questions and all the excellent chat. Everybody was electric as usual. Thank you so much for your interaction. And thank you again, Bob, for this wonderful presentation. And everybody have an excellent rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.